Hello and welcome everybody to the Supply Chain podcast. Today we're going to talk about the supply chain resilience and how the ever-changing world situations force us to make different kind of decisions and have to adapt to the changing atmosphere and environment. So we have here the Doina, so you can maybe tell us about the topic.
Well, first of all, I would like to actually introduce our guest. I'm very pleased to be joined today in this conversation by Pietro Karjalainen from our consulting.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pietro, for joining us today. Our consulting has been present in Asia for over 20 years, providing consulting services for matters related to supply chain. And present in different Asian countries, ARC has extensive knowledge in various areas concerning the supply chain and whatever challenges this presents. Pietro is ARC Senior Vice President, and he has been studying supply chain and building supply chains for over 15 years. So it's a great honor to have you on the show, Pietro, and I'm very excited to be discussing this topic.
Thank you.
With you. Right, strategic supply chain management has not been around for that long, right? I think we've seen that as a source of cutting costs mainly, and yet when the pandemic happened and everything and the backlash afterwards, everyone started paying much more attention to the supply chain and how diverse and how complicated it can actually be. And furthermore, they have also understood, or companies, even middle-sized companies, have understood that really what happens during the supply chain, all the small events, big events, can have a major impact on the way we do business. So we have taught, or we have learned, and we have taught ourselves that basically it's very important to have a lean process, right? To cut out everything that's unnecessary, make it as cost effective as possible. But how much do you think, Pietro, that reduce really the flexibility you have? I mean, I guess you still have to have the lean processes, but how do you see that?
Absolutely. So the supply chain development and all the factors to be considered has increased quite a lot since 20 years. Previously, we didn't have climate-related problems so much like today. There are several factors which needs to be studied and planned. Also, I think you need an eagle eye view today when you are looking your supply chains. So it's not only into one certain region or something. You have to plan your suppliers and supply chains from worldwide.
Because you have a lot wider scope basically.
Absolutely.
To understand what's really going on and not be too much focused or concentrated on one thing when everything else is changing around you as well.
Yes, that is absolutely true. And there are trade routes, for example, which are very important nowadays. We have seen the disruptions in Suez Canal and have to increasing the travel times and travel costs. Several other issues, floods, landslides, and things like that.
And that's what I find fascinating really about it. And I think a lot of people really focus on these major events, which is easy to capture, of course, because, we look at the elections in the US and we know that we're about to see a lot of interesting things happening and coming along. But then again, a lot of things are kind of hidden and you don't know about them. Although we live in this world where technology is omnipresent, really, and ever since with the full adoption of the ERP system, we're moving to Industry 4.0, then further on 5.0, we integrate AI all over the place, which is great. I think these developments and the speed in which they're happening are great. But the fact of the matter is that people are still behind that. We need these systems, we need these tools and this technology, but we also need to be able to have that eagle eye. And that's, the experts, the people that are behind all of this to really know how to analyze this data to collect it and to analyze it and to understand the complexity of the supply chain. Because if you have a major event, it's easy to analyze, you look at it, you kind of are able to predict. But then there are these small things, this political decision in one country that can trigger something that you didn't really expect, like a lack of containers all of a sudden, and increased prices. Or you have the events, unfortunate events in Spain recently with the floods, that have incredible effects on the supply chain. And those are things that we can't predict, first of all. And second of all, there are also smaller things that sort of we miss. So how do we capture all this data? Are there tools to be able to analyze all of this data? How are we able to navigate all this?
I think the tools are coming. It's all about the data, crunching the lot of data, what is available. And I think AI, which you mentioned, is something which is going to bring in very near future better tools to understand. But we have to distinguish the things which are occasional disruptions and then the things which are regular based on certain facts. And especially these sudden disruptions are very, very difficult to predict. But we have seen lately that climate change, hurricanes, landslides, these kinds starts to be more and more frequent in certain areas. And you have to plan based on that.
And even those areas where they don't usually have this kind of climate change events and bigger disruptions.
Then another thing is political stability also. That is a critical sector also. We all saw what happened with the Ukraine war, how that disrupted textile supply chains and several other supply chains. We see the Houthis in Suez Canal, which is basically a political disruption also.
That's true.
And it also decides where its political disruptions really happen, because what happened with Russia and Ukraine not only disrupted the supply chain from the point of view that it affected certain routes, for instance, but it put a strain on raw material availability that increased costs. It shifted the whole supply chains, trajectory and things like that. So all of a sudden we saw the energy costs going up like mad, driven by the reality, but also about speculation, because this is the world where we live in. And it's just that I find it very difficult to navigate this murky waters.
Yeah. Now we talk about data, we talk about strategy, we talk about changes in the environment, all the things that is very difficult to kind of prepare for. Then we must go down to different kind of strategies. How are you able to understand and prepare for these different kind of events that you are occasionally going to face? Is there some sort of strategies that you could maybe open for us in that terms?
Yeah, I think one of the things is that you can never stand by with your supply chains. You have to be continuously monitoring them and also predicting possible problems which might arise.
So looking at the global trends and news, but also looking at the data as we spoke of.
From the data is this one, and the other thing is also that you have to have a plan B also. So sourcing worldwide means that you might source in the west or east, but you need to have a secondary choice, which brings to the original idea of sourcing, which is saving cost, and which means also that sometimes offshoring sourcing from Asia is very cost effective, but if that disrupted, you need to have a plan where you source, for example, from Europe, which increases the cost, but then it's the balance between, do you want to lose sales in the final end, or do you want to do sales but with the lesser
Yeah, and in the end, if we talk about manufacturing different kinds of products,
Yes.
it doesn't really matter what kind of product you're producing, but you need raw materials. Like if a situation comes up that you all of a sudden don't get your material, what you require for the production, you're going to have to shut down the plant. And if we look at that, that's going to be the most expensive way of facing this issue. And that's why it's always important to have these different routes, different sources, and balance between these different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one thing is, of course, that you need to have the secondary raw material sources, but you must be ensuring also that they are continuous. We have seen these disruptions in the raw materials also. Earth minerals, things like that are very, very vulnerable.
Indeed.
Yeah, and those resources that are not regenerated, those tend to gain strategic meaning to certain countries. We've seen that, for instance, with yellow phosphorus in countries like China or Brazil. So when a country decides that a certain resource becomes strategic, even if it wasn't, we don't even have to talk about fossil fuel, but really also this, because the yellow phosphorus is used to manufacture fertilizers, which again goes into the food supply chain, and you need to keep your people fed. So that sort of thing can have an impact also on the supply chain, because a country where with a political regime, and we go back to what you said about political stability, but with a political regime that's not so stable or is a little bit more totalitarian, then they can just come and say, okay, well, no, we're not exporting this anymore. And if you're caught in that situation where you're dependent fully of that particular country to source this sort of raw materials or products that are based on that particular raw materials, then you're stuck. So you need to come up with plan B, as you said. And what I find fascinating about that and makes my job as a supply chain manager quite interesting is how do you navigate and how do you keep good care of all of the partners involved, because it becomes very, very important to keep your plan A but also plan B close to you and have them both
And also
satisfied
approved by the actual manufacturer who requires this raw material. They need to rely on the quality, rely on the environmental aspects of the raw material and all the other stuff that remains in the supply chain. So it is actually a very, very wide scope that we're looking at here.
Yeah.
Although we're talking just about supplier A and supplier B, one being this and one being that. But in the end, it's much more versatile, much more complex environment.
Yeah, and then it's also a little bit about whether or not this is possible, because in some cases it is not. It boils down to the company's strategy, first of all, and what you want to achieve. Just as Pietro was saying, you balance out. Do you want to keep your customer or do you want to save costs? Sometimes those you can't do both. So you have to make a choice. Those are strategic choices that we're talking about. And then in some cases, you can't go for the perfect strategy that you would like or the perfect option, because in certain cases, you're not able to. Like, no matter how much we want to get a certain raw material, if it's not manufactured in a region that's stable politically and otherwise, then we can't do it. So then you have to think about how do you adapt to that situation and how you make sure that you get that raw material when you need it, or what changes do you have to?
You have to have a reliable supply chain, reliable partners, and everything else in between.
Yeah. So we go back to relationships and making strong partnerships. Yeah, that's quite important.
Human partnerships matter.
Yeah.
We have seen this kind of big problems in the electronics business.
Can you elaborate?
Yeah.
What are you actually seeing there?
Well, a little bit over a year ago, there was a quite hard shortage of electronics components in the markets. You could see that, for example, in the car manufacturing. You couldn't get new cars because they couldn't get the electronics done and so on. And at that period, there were certain products which were with a lead time of 1 year and no alternative supply.
Yeah.
So this goes back to the ensuring certain safety stocks in the business as well, which is cost also.
But as we're talking about the different strategies to mitigate this issue, this actually brings us quite nicely to the next topic, which is China plus one, which is a very trendy buzzword we're talking about. Could you maybe open up a bit? What does China plus one mean?
Well, it means that companies are looking for alternative supply chains. China has been and is still and is going to be a biggest country of outsourced manufacturing. There's no doubt about that. People are afraid a little bit. There is the fear of this raw material availability, geopolitical risks, tariffs and things like that, and people are looking for alternative sources. And what we have seen, ARC, we have made a survey study like every year on the companies, some 150 executives and sourcing managers, and we have found out that 70% of the companies which are looking for alternative supply chains are still looking more for the cost, whereas 40% of them are doing risk mitigation. And that's clearly the China plus one strategy. I must say that it's surprising that it's still about cost, more cost than risk, because I could estimate should be more risk. The sourcing on the China plus one is very much about going back to nearshoring or to local sourcing, but very much to regional sourcing also. It all depends where the goods are going. It depends about the lean processes, speed. There are several factors which each company has to analyze himself. There is no one solution for everybody.
Yeah, that's what makes it difficult, but also quite interesting, really. So, and this is why it's no surprise that supply chain managers we see up in the C-suite these days, meaning that they become chief of supply chain, which has not been a common trend in the past, but they are just it's given much more importance presently, and this is the reason why, because there are so many factors, and then the consequences if you don't have a strong supply chain strategy are quite big.
Company survival might be tied directly to supply chain. That's very, very common. The other thing is also that we see more and more demand for external services for analyzing and investigating the supply chains. That is clearly increased. So it's very difficult to analyze your Asian supply chains from Europe, for example, unless you have foot on the ground or reliable service or support telling you more about the local environment.
Yeah, you need to have the local experts as well to also make sure that the quality is correct.
Quality is correct.
I think that's also a big thing. Yeah. And to really get this information that you require.
Absolutely, yes.
Well, I think that's key, because the quality, I mean, you can get an external lab and it gets a bit easier from that point of view. But this, getting that real data, the real truth behind what really happens there, that's when external partners are needed usually, or if you have a foot in there, if you have your own office in there with local people to collect this data and provide it to you, that's also quite important. And I have seen the benefits of actually having someone there and understanding how things work and then providing that information onwards. And
I think important thing is also that what we have seen is increased partnerships between the buyer and the supplier. It's not so much anymore about buyer and supplier. It's more like partnerships where both parties are seeing the strategy benefits, and it's more like a win-win situation.
Both parties, but also all the other parties involved in between, and also we sometimes go even forward and backwards on the supply chain from those. So they need to have a very vast and joint collaboration on everything. But I do think that this actually wraps up quite nicely our topic for today. So basically, we've talked about the global events that we're seeing. We've talked about the trends, we've talked about the disruptions, the strategies to actually mitigate the supply chain issues that we're seeing today. So from that perspective, I'd like to thank you, Pietro Karjalainen, for being here as our guest.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Perfect, and thank you for all the listeners and watchers online. So we'll be moving forward here, and if you're curious of hearing and listening or learning more on the supply chain and on this topic, make sure to listen to our next episode. Thank you.
Thank you
very much.